The gospel world has weathered scandals, rivalries, and debates before, but nothing like this. What began as quiet whispers and subtle tension has now erupted into a full-blown storm, shaking the entire community. At the center of it all, two towering figures, LaAndrea Johnson, the raw, unfiltered voice of a new generation, and Bishop Noel Jones, a seasoned leader with influence that stretches across nations. What started as small disagreements and passing comments has now spiraled far beyond control. Fans are divided, church leaders are choosing sides, and social media is ablaze with speculation. This isn't just a clash of personalities, it's a battle of visions, faith, and power. And trust me, what unfolded between LaAndrea Johnson and Bishop Noel Jones is something the gospel community will never forget. Their paths were so different that it almost seemed inevitable they would collide. LaAndrea Johnson, from the moment she stepped onto the stage of BT's Sunday Best in 2010, proved she was unlike anyone the gospel world had ever seen. Raw, unfiltered, and fearless, she sang from the deepest parts of her pain, homelessness, single motherhood, and battles she never tried to hide. That honesty made her voice magnetic, her testimony unforgettable, and her music powerful because it was real. Fans embraced her transparency, celebrating a woman who refused to fit the polished image of the perfect church girl. But while her supporters loved her boldness, many church leaders whispered their disapproval, calling her openness reckless, even disrespectful. On the other side stood Bishop Noel Jones, a man shaped by tradition, order, and decades of ministry influence. As the pastor of the City of Refuge in California, his reputation was built on discipline, structure, and a pulpit presence that demanded respect. For Bishop Jones, gospel music and ministry were not just about expression, they were about responsibility. He believed leaders were called to inspire, to set a standard, and never to let their flaws become the focus. Where LaAndrea brought raw reality, Bishop Jones represented polished authority. And when two worlds this different finally meet, the result is more than just a disagreement, it's an explosion waiting to happen. The seeds of tension were sown there. LaAndrea stood for liberty, openness, and dismantling obstacles. Bishop Jones, on the other hand, represented custom, authority, and maintaining norms. Those who were watching closely realized that this conflict was imminent. It was like fire and water. However, things start to become interesting at this point. At first, neither of them assaulted the other directly. Rather, the tension gradually increased in silence, like a distant storm building. LaAndrea's audacity garnered media attention. She was candid about her struggles with alcohol. She stunned those who expected gospel musicians to be perfect by living her life in a way that exposed church hypocrisy on social media. Some pastors started giving sermons that many believed were directed at her, cautioning young Christians about gifted but irresponsible leaders. Bishop Jones, meanwhile, was known for holding leaders responsible, so it was obvious where he stood. He frequently discussed the value of maintaining one's spiritual integrity, and even when he did not specifically identify anyone, it seemed as though he was speaking to artists such as LaAndrea. The most absurd aspect was that, although none of them openly recognized the widening gap, their admirers and business insiders took note of every little action. Private rooms were the starting point for conversations, and rumors of disagreement quickly spread. When they both started to become more visible, destiny took a surprising turn. Bishop Jones was the star of Preachers of Law, a reality show that featured both his personal life and his sermons. He was perceived by viewers as someone who had to live under scrutiny while carrying the burden of leadership. LaAndrea was also starting to speak up for others who thought that the church was rejecting and condemning them. Although many found inspiration in her candor, it also made her a contentious figure. Everyone sensed that a clash was imminent as they both came to represent opposing facets of the gospel world. Here's the startling bit though. Church officials were already discussing the conflict between these two influential people while their admirers were honoring them separately behind the scenes. Music and sermons were no longer the only topics. Two very divergent ideas for the future of the gospel were at issue. The plots started to pick up steam at this point. Indirect social media posts, fervent sermons, and subtle remarks made during interviews all spoke to something more significant. Fans became aware of the tension that was developing, the side remarks, and the shade. The tale was different since it was no longer a private dispute. It served as a metaphor for the division within gospel culture. Those with knowledge of the issue recognized that a public confrontation was inevitable, even though the majority believed it was all talk. Leandrea Johnson and Bishop Noel Jones's silent conflict had grown beyond whispers. Everyone in the gospel community was finding it impossible to ignore. The speed at which things began to accumulate behind the scenes will astound you. Initially, it appeared to be simply another disagreement between a revered priest and a fearless artist. However, things start to become interesting at this point. Those who were paying careful attention started to see a trend. Bishop Jones's tone became more acute each time he discussed integrity and the duties of gospel leaders, as though he were speaking directly to a particular person. Leandria's social media tirades and interviews about the hypocrisy of the church, meanwhile, became more audacious. She publicly discussed her refusal to conform to conventional norms, her lifestyle, and her rejection of the refined image that many in evangelical culture demanded. Fans soon started making connections and speculating that the two were headed for a collision. Here's the startling bit though. It wasn't just them that caused the tension. What they stood for was the issue. As a guy who prioritized norms and order, Bishop Jones has spent years cultivating his reputation as a spiritual leader for many who felt condemned by the church. However, Leandria had emerged as a hero, those who valued her authenticity over perfection. Their shared location served as a stark reminder of the widening rift among the gospel community. One side demands transparency and honesty, while the other calls for structure and purity. There were discussions taking place behind closed doors, as Leandria herself was growing increasingly vocal about the pressure gospel musicians bear to look perfect. Rumors circulated that her name was brought up in secret conversations with pastors. This was no longer merely tension. The storm that was building was about to burst into the open. That's how it got out of hand. It was more difficult to overlook their quarrel because both of their jobs were booming. The audience got a unique look into Bishop Jones' personal life through his position on Preachers of Law. Others critiqued him for being too polished and removed from actual challenges, while others applauded his vulnerability. Leandria, meanwhile, was shattering stereotypes with her unrepentant demeanor. She was not scared to talk about her pain on stage, act barefoot, or cry in public. Although her supporters praised her sincerity, her detractors became more vocal, accusing her of fusing insurrection with ministry. When the rumors about their arguments grew more persistent, destiny took a surprising turn. Both sides' supporters started arguing over who was correct, and gospel websites suggested that these two might finally face off in public. The most absurd aspect was that, without even realizing it, they appeared to be getting ready for this clash. Bishop Jones seemed to be addressing artists like her in every lecture she gave about accountability. Additionally, it felt like a reaction to every post or interview Leandria made regarding the judgmental atmosphere of the church. Without them ever speaking to one another directly, it resembled a public conversation. Industry insiders were aware that a major event was just around the corner. The night that made all the difference then arrived. They were both in the same room, on the same stage, under the same limelight, because of a significant gospel event. It was intended to be a night of solidarity, a celebration of ministry and gospel music. Rather, it turned into the spark that started a firestorm. From the beginning, the event night seemed electrifying. You won't believe how quickly it became a topic of conversation. It was originally intended to be a celebration of gospel music and ministry. As church leaders, gospel insiders, and fans crowded the arena in anticipation of a harmonious evening, the mood was electric. However, things start to become interesting at this point. Everyone who was aware of the developing rivalry between Leandria Johnson and Bishop Noel Jones was keeping a close eye on the tension that was simmering behind the smiles and handshakes. Leandria was the first to take the stage, and she gave a tremendous performance. With each note, she gave her all, and her unadulterated passion made everyone stand up. She lacked practiced perfection and a well-rehearsed act. She brought her truth, her suffering, and her narrative. Her genuineness resonated with the audience, and many were brought to tears. Here's the startling bit though. Not everyone in the audience had the same impression of her performance. While some muttered that she lacked decorum and was too raw, others admired her openness. Her style represented all the traditionalists in the room, worried about the loss of gospel music's heritage. Bishop Noel Jones took the stage later that evening. As usual, he was cool, collected, and authoritative. His lecture, which addressed the responsibilities of ministry personnel and the weight of leadership, was incisive. He cautioned that having skill without self-control might be harmful and that gospel leaders should motivate others by their deeds as well as their songs. Although he didn't mention names, the tone and timing of his remarks seemed too precise to be an accident. Leandria sat listening, clearly uninterested, but many in the audience instantly associated his message with her. She reportedly whispered to those around and shook her head, according to witnesses. The tension was no longer concealed, which was the most absurd aspect. It was felt by all. The tension ultimately burst when the event changed to a panel discussion and both of them were on stage together. Leandria was the first to respond when the moderator inquired about striking a balance between accountability and authenticity in gospel leadership. She talked passionately, refusing to present a false front for the church. She clarified that she thought her candor was making people feel seen and that people were sick of leaders who pretended to be flawless while concealing their difficulties. Some audience members loudly applauded her remarks, particularly those who could identify with her candor. Bishop Jones, however, did not remain quiet. He adamantly retorted that while transparency was beneficial, it was risky in the absence of change. He emphasized that leaders, especially those who have an impact on thousands of lives, cannot use their hardships as a justification for living carelessly. Their words sharpened, and tension built in the room. Bishop Jones maintained that gospel leaders were held to a higher standard, while Leandria defended her decision to be transparent. What began as a civil conversation descended into a heated argument with the audience. Some nodded in accord with Bishop Jones's authority, while others applauded Leandria's audacity. This was no longer merely a dispute. This was a real-time cultural confrontation. That evening, destiny took a surprising turn when audience members recorded snippets of their conversation, which were quickly circulated online. The internet was already buzzing by the end of the event, and their altercation was turning into the largest gospel dispute in years. The whole gospel world was on fire by the following morning. Videos of a furious altercation between Bishop Noel Jones and Leandria Johnson went viral on social media. You won't believe how quickly this intimate tension became a public spectacle. Reactions were all over Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Trending hashtags were #GospelStandards and #LeandriaViceJones. There were memes. Within hours, reaction videos surfaced, and fans were fervently picking sides. It becomes intriguing at this point. What began as a dispute at a gospel gathering evolved into a national discussion over the true meaning of gospel ministry and music. On the one hand, Leandria received accolades for her bravery and sincerity. They regarded her as a voice for the broken, someone willing to express out loud what so many had been feeling. She was relatable because she was open about her difficulties, especially to people who had experienced rejection or judgment from the church. Supporters felt that she was attempting to be authentic rather than rebellious. Here's the startling bit though. Bishop Jones was firmly supported by an equal number of individuals. His followers maintained that holiness and discipline couldn't be sacrificed for authenticity and that ministry leaders were expected to set an example. Bishop Jones wasn't passing judgment on them. He was defending the sacrosanct norms of gospel ministry and music. What's most crazy is how fast this altercation escalated beyond a mere altercation between two individuals. Pastors started giving sermons on the subject. It was debated by radio hosts. Article after article from gospel blogs framed this as a generational split in gospel culture, one side demanding tradition and accountability, the other asking for transparency and reform. The issue was even covered by secular media, who referred to it as a gospel showdown and discussed it as a component of a broader discussion about leadership authenticity. All of a sudden, the argument was about more than simply a singer and a bishop. It dealt with the overall course of gospel ministry and music. After this, destiny really took a surprising turn for them both. For Leandria, this moment reinforced her reputation as a strong speaker, someone unafraid to criticize church systems. However, it also made her much more visible because everyone was judging her more severely than before. The altercation strengthened Bishop Noel Jones' reputation as a traditionalist. However, he was criticized for being disconnected from the next generation of Christians. This night left a lasting stain on each of their reputations, and neither was able to shake the shadow of that viral event. The fact that the plot was more than just drama sets it apart. It was a pivotal moment. It compelled the gospel community to engage in difficult discussions about honesty, leadership, and faith. It revealed profound splits that had been subtly escalating for years and forced followers to choose between two compelling points of view. The most absurd thing is that people are still arguing over who was correct. Was Bishop Jones correct to hold the line, or was Leandria a hero for expressing the truth? It wasn't simply controversy that night. It sparked a discussion that continues to rock gospel society. This was not just a dispute. In front of us, history was being created.